Let's start off with some of these headlines that just came across actually about Saudi Arabia really tightening and hardening its stance on Qatar, asking it to close down Al Jazeera there, cut ties with Iran. How does this end here?
Well, it probably doesn't end well. Betty, what we have here, though, are these three Gulf states, basically the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. There's lots of backstory here, tribal stories, who stole whose sand dunes, a long time ago, and some very modern versions. The way I look at it is this way. Qatar was a real pioneer in that region. It opened Al Jazeera, the first really sort of modern TV station that showed something other than just two leaders talking to each other. They also opened the Gulf to education, to art, in some really cool ways. They were pioneers, but then they got off track. They got off track because they tried to project power into the region. They tried to be power brokers in places like Libya and Syria. 300,000 people with $300 billion can't be power brokers.
Right.
And I think they got used by people. And the Qataris also fell into kind of dancing at every wedding, a little Iran, a little Hamas, a little Israel, to their credit, opening ties there.
Yeah.
And so I think they need to go back to that pioneering, country. But at the same time, I'm not comfortable with Saudi Arabia saying cut relations with Iran. I think it's important. Nothing has ruined the Middle East more, Betty, than the sectarian conflict between Shiites and Sunnis, Persians and Arabs. Yeah. And if Qatar can provide a bridge for that, I think that's healthy. Saudi Arabia, again, I feel the same way, of two minds. Its new crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, I think has a lot of potential. He's much more.
In what way?
Well, he's much more McKinsey than Wahhabi.
Okay.
That he's really someone. He's a millennial. He's much more McKinsey than Wahhabi. He wants to open Saudi Arabia up. I think you'll see him letting women drive. And I think he can play a really positive role, okay? So I think that's good. But Saudi Arabia has stuff to answer for, too. Saudi Arabia changed the face of Islam, okay? And from Islam from Morocco to Indonesia by funding the most puritanical, obscurantist interpretation of Islam. So Saudi Arabia dictating to Qatar, I also have a little problem with that, too. These guys don't come with clean hands either. So mixed picture again. To me, the place I identify most with in the region has been Dubai. And the reason I like Dubai, what in the UAE is not a democracy. You can't write an op-ed piece attacking, the ruler of Dubai. Let's have no illusions about that. But Dubai created a place where young Arabs can be Arab and global at the same time. And it is a place where people can do art, they can do literature, they can express themselves, realize their potential in a lot of ways, and be Arab and global at the same time. And the region needs more of that. Dubai is the real anti-ISIS, not forcing another country to shut down its TV station.
Saudi Arabia is so dominant, right? I mean, and given that, on the heel of the trip by President Trump to Saudi Arabia, how do you think the U.S. approaches this right now?
Well, I think the U.S. job should be to, again, diminish the sectarian conflict between Shiites and Sunnis, not to take sides in it.
Right.
The Qataris have a little bit of the problem that the Taiwanese have. Here we are in Asia. I really love Taiwan. It's an amazing country, really. I just came from there, and when you think what this country has built on a barren rock in a typhoon-laden sea, with $400 billion in reserves, that's amazing. But I always tell my friends in Taiwan, I'm so impressed with what you've done. So much has changed in the years I've been coming here. There's just one thing that hasn't changed: your geography. You're still a tiny island off a giant mainland. And Qatar's geography hasn't changed either. There's still 300 people on a peninsula off a giant Saudi Arabia. And countries that forget their geography sometimes run into real problems.
Right, and then they get reminded harshly of their place, right? As Taiwan did as well.
Absolutely.
We are here, Tom, and in particular here in Hong Kong, where we're approaching the 20th anniversary of the handover.
I was there for the handover, by the way.
You were there as well?
Yeah,
okay, wow. So you remember that clearly. I can't believe 20 years have passed this quickly. What do you think so far about the progress we've seen, in Hong Kong and Chinese rule, so to speak, here? And where do you think 20 years from now Hong Kong is going to be?
Well, I think that, to be honest, Betty, I think the meta story is really China, not Hong Kong, because whatever happens in China is going to dictate what's happening in Hong Kong. And I think the meta story in China today The one that we have to really focus on and be a little concerned of in the West. I thought Jim McGregor put it well, and Jim's one of the smartest people writing about China. He said, when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, we expected it got a lot of advantages. We gave it as a developing country. And we did that in the West because we thought China would reform and open.
Right.
And it turns out China reformed and closed. That it has not opened its economy at the level that we expected. Tencent and Alibaba, they have cloud servers in Silicon Valley, but Amazon.com can't have one in China. So China has not...
So unfair advantages. Okay.
And I think that there's going to be a confrontation over that at some point if China doesn't go back to reforming and opening. And
when you say confrontation, though, what do you mean, though?
I mean, I think you could see a border adjustment tax in the United States.
Okay.
I think that, I'm a big believer some things are true even if Donald Trump believes them. Okay. And one of the things he believed that China was taking unfair advantage of us on trade. I consider myself someone very pro the U.S.-China relationship.
Right.
And I really do believe that. I've always said China and America are the real one country, two systems.
Yeah.
Our economies are completely intertwined. We're the real one country, two systems. But at the same time, I think China has reformed and closed more than it's reformed and opened, and we're going to have to deal with that, and China's going to have to face up to that.
So, we were just talking about U.S.-China relations. We saw this boil over in the last few days, the issue with North Korea and the sad death of Otto Warmbier, right? Yeah. Which many have said in Washington that this was, a real changing, point here. How do you think that gets, quote unquote, solved, right, between the U.S. and China and North Korea?
Well, I'm not really optimistic that anything is going to solve it. I'll be honest with you, Betty, because what do we know about China's position on North Korea? We know that China loves Korea so much it wants there to be two of them, okay? And that is a core Chinese position. It does not want to see a unified Korean peninsula with a nuclear capability. And I think it starts there. So I think China will do a lot of things it's already cut off coal purchases, so that's hurt North Korea. But China provides 95% of North Korea's oil, and it hasn't touched that. So China could turn the lights out in North Korea if they wanted to. And so I think what they're trying to signal the North is, don't put that last screw in, whatever nuclear thing you're building, whatever missile you're building, don't invite the Americans in. But short of that, I think they're going to really
do you think there is a chance, though,
protect the North. Do
you think there is a chance of U.S. military strikes?
I think you can't rule it out. I think it's most unlikely because the fact is we have 30,000 some troops in Seoul. They would be exposed. South Korea would be exposed. Japan would be exposed. So I think nobody knows what's going to happen. Frankly, I did a column about a couple weeks ago. I ended it with the medieval fable of the criminal who is brought to the king, and he pleads for his life by telling the king, if you just give me a year, Your Highness, I will teach your horse to sing. So the king says, well, what the heck? I'll give him a chance. He goes back to his cell. He tells his cellmate, I got a year. I promised to teach the king's horse to sing. And his cellmate said, well, you can't teach the horse to sing. He says, I know, but who knows what will happen in a year? Maybe the king will die. Maybe I'll die. Maybe the horse will die, or maybe the horse will sing. So on North Korea, we're all waiting for the horse to sing.
Yeah, absolutely. We are all waiting for that. And it seems like there are certainly many of these sort of hot spots all over the world like that. A lot of people have also talked about how, given the U.S.'s withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, given the rising protectionism, that China is now, there's an opportunity that, in fact, the Beijing leaders are perhaps celebrating, amongst themselves, that they now have this global leadership role. Do you buy that?
I think there's a lot to it. I wrote a column, tongue-in-cheek, several months ago, saying everyone thinks Donald Trump's a Russian agent. I don't. I think he's a Chinese agent. Donald Trump's motto is "Let's make China great again," and his first initiative, which I consider the single dumbest thing the United States has done, frankly, since the Iraq War, easily, is that before he even spent the first day in office, he ripped up the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now let's just think about that for a second. Trump comes in, so I'm going to be hard on China. I'm going to force them to open up on trade. What would I do if that was my policy? I think what would I do? I think what I do is I form a 12-nation trading alliance based on my values, my interests. Then I'd sit down at the table with China and say, meet my 11 partners.
Right.
I might even call this the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And what did Trump do? Day one, he rips that up. So, you know, negotiating with China on trade without leverage, that's like playing baseball without a bat. Your hand gets a little hurting after a while.
But you think we don't have leverage, though?
I'm dubious that we're ready to use it, you know,
right.
and we would have had a lot more leverage. And Trump didn't even read TPP, and he tore it up. And so what I find now, again, the Chinese just applaud it, first of all, because they've got one belt, one road. They've got their own framework for the region. Now everyone's going to sign up for that.
Yeah.
And by the way, you know who we hurt most? Chinese reformers. Because they would have used the leverage of TPP to get China to open reform.
To get the internal reform.
Single dumbest thing